Total household debt in the United States hit $18.6 trillion in the third quarter of 2025, the highest figure ever recorded in the history of the New York Federal Reserve's Household Debt and Credit Report. And in that same quarter, credit card balances jumped $24 billion to an all-time high. Auto loan balances climbed to $1.67 trillion. Student loan balances reached $1.66 trillion, and the share of credit card balances in serious delinquency, meaning 90 days past due, climbed to 7.1%, a level not seen since the years immediately following the 2008 financial crisis. And at the same time, sitting underneath the consumer debt crisis like a geological fault line, $1.8 trillion in commercial real estate loans are maturing by the end of 2026. Office loan delinquencies in the commercial mortgage-backed securities market hit an all-time record of 12.34% in January. More than half of the approximately $100 billion in securitized commercial mortgages coming due this year are unlikely to pay off at maturity, according to Morningstar DBRS. And the _0_0_ strategy that banks used for 3 years to avoid recognizing losses on commercial real estate loans is collapsing because the interest rate environment that was supposed to normalize never normalized. And the hybrid work revolution that was supposed to be temporary is now permanent. And 13 million student loan borrowers may be in default by the end of 2026, according to Protect Borrowers, which would represent 1/4 of all federal student loan borrowers. And 2.2 million vehicles were repossessed in 2025, with forecasts reaching a record 3 million by year-end. And none of this includes the impact of the Iran war, the oil shock, the tariff uncertainty, the debt ceiling, or the Federal Reserve chair transition that are all converging on the same 90-day window. The American financial system is carrying more debt at more risk with less margin for error than at any point since 2008. And the next 90 days will determine whether that debt load remains manageable or becomes the trigger for a cascading failure that reaches every bank, every portfolio, and every household in the country. $1.8 trillion in commercial real estate debt is coming due, and the buildings are worth less than what is owed on them. The commercial real estate maturity wall is the financial time bomb that almost nobody outside of Wall Street is discussing in language that ordinary Americans can understand. So let me explain what it is, why it matters, and why it is about to reach its peak intensity within the next 90 days. Between 2015 and 2021, commercial real estate developers and investors borrowed trillions of dollars to purchase, build, and renovate office buildings, shopping malls, hotels, apartment complexes, and retail centers. Those loans were typically structured with 5-year or 10-year terms at interest rates between 3 and 4%. The loans are now coming due, and the world they were made in no longer exists. The borrowers who locked in financing at 3% are now facing refinance rates of 6 to 7% or higher, a gap of more than 300 basis points that many properties simply cannot support with their current cash flow. At the same time, property values in the office sector have plummeted because hybrid work has permanently reduced the demand for physical office space. TREP, the most widely followed analytics firm in commercial real estate, reported that CMBS office loan delinquencies reached an all-time record of 12.34% in January 2026, the highest since they began tracking the metric in the year 2000. Among office loans that matured before 2026 and still have outstanding balances, 83.7% show delinquencies and 92.7% require special servicing due to loan repayment or payoff problems. Nearly half of the 5-year loans originated in 2019 and 2021 failed to pay off at maturity. The total volume of commercial real estate debt in the United States is now approximately $5 trillion, according to the Wall Street Journal, with banks and thrifts holding approximately 36%. And close to $25 billion in CMBS loans are now past maturity without repayment, liquidation, or formal extension, a level of distressed debt not seen since the cleanup period following the 2008 financial crisis. S&P Global Projects the maturity wall peaking at $1.26 trillion in 2027, meaning the pressure does not peak and release. It builds through 2026 and intensifies further through 2027. And the borrowers who have been surviving on __quote_1___ modifications, where lenders push out maturity dates to avoid recognizing losses, are running out of extensions. Lenders are now demanding significant borrower concessions, including fresh equity injections, reduced loan balances, and higher interest rates as conditions for extension. Borrowers who cannot meet those conditions face foreclosure, which puts the property on the market at a distressed price that further depresses valuations across the entire sector. The cycle feeds itself. Every foreclosure sale reduces the appraised value of comparable properties, which reduces the loan-to-value ratio of every other borrower in the neighborhood, which triggers additional covenant violations, which triggers additional foreclosures. This is the cascading mechanism that turned the 2008 residential mortgage crisis into a financial system crisis. The same mechanism is now operating in commercial real estate, and the community and regional banks that hold the most commercial real estate exposure, those with $1 billion to $10 billion in assets, are almost 5 times more exposed to the CRE sector than the largest banks according to BRG. Over 900 banks carry CRE exposure above 300% of their capital. If the 90-day window ahead produces a combination of rising interest rates from the debt ceiling standoff, declining property values from continued office vacancies, and reduced lending capacity from bank stress, the commercial real estate maturity wall could trigger a wave of regional bank failures that reverberates into the broader financial system. And the accounting treatment of these distressed loans has obscured the scale of the problem from public view. When banks extend a loan instead of declaring it delinquent, the loan remains classified as performing on the bank's balance sheet. The loss is not recognized. The capital reserve against the loss is not increased. The bank's reported financial condition appears stronger than its actual condition. This is the __2 strategy that the industry has been running for 3 years, and the new bank reporting rules that are taking effect could make the problem even less visible. CRE Daily reported that upcoming changes to loan disclosure rules will allow modified loans to fall off bank reporting requirements after 1 year. Some lenders could begin applying the change immediately. This means the regulatory visibility into bank CRE exposure could actually decrease at the exact moment that the underlying risk is peaking. The banks will look healthier on paper just as they become riskier in reality, and distress-related apartment sales have risen steadily since the pandemic. Rolling 12-month troubled volume climbed from approximately $1.1 billion in early 2020 to $6.7 billion in early 2024, and then to a new high of $13.8 billion by June 2025. The trend is accelerating and will continue accelerating through the maturity wall peak because every property that trades at a distressed price establishes a new comparable valuation that pulls down the appraised value of every similar property in the market. The math is self-reinforcing, and the 90-day window ahead is when the largest volume of maturities hits the largest concentration of distressed assets in the most stressed interest rate environment since the 2008 crisis. 13 million student loan borrowers are heading toward default, and the system that was supposed to catch them collapsed. The student loan crisis that is unfolding in America right now makes the subprime mortgage crisis look modest by comparison in terms of the number of people affected. Total student debt in the United States exceeds $1.8 trillion, making it the second largest consumer credit market in America after mortgages. It is larger than auto loan debt. It is larger than total credit card debt, and Protect Borrowers projected that as many as 13 million borrowers may end up in default by the end of 2026 if current delinquency trends hold. 13 million, 1/4 of all federal student loan borrowers. And the student loan delinquency rate, meaning the percentage of balances that are 90 or more days past due, surged to 14.3% in the third quarter of 2025 from just 0.8% in the fourth quarter of 2024. That is a 17-fold increase in delinquencies in less than a year, and it was caused not by borrowers refusing to pay, but by a catastrophic failure of the administrative infrastructure that was supposed to manage the return to repayment after the pandemic pause. When bills resumed in fall 2023, many borrowers never received a bill. Others got incorrect statements with wrong amounts or due dates. Tens of millions of borrowers had their loans shuffled to new servicers during the pandemic without adequate notification. Some borrowers tried to set up autopay only to encounter non-functioning websites. Others called customer service lines and were trapped in what the federal student aid ombudsman called __quote_3__, where calls went unanswered for months. The CFPB ombudsman reported a record number of complaints about servicers misapplying payments and then sending delinquency notices to borrowers who had paid. And while borrowers spent months trying to resolve these administrative errors, interest accrued and credit scores collapsed. And the One Big Beautiful Bill Act removed the ability for medical students to receive certain federal student loans, capped borrowing amounts, and limited repayment options to only 2 plans, further restricting the safety valves that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of default cascade. A federal student loan default is not a minor financial setback. It triggers wage garnishment, tax refund seizure, Social Security offset, professional license revocation in some states, and credit destruction that makes it nearly impossible to rent an apartment, buy a car, or pass a background check for employment. And 13 million Americans are heading toward that cliff within the next 90 days. For context, during the subprime mortgage crisis, the delinquency rate on single-family home mortgages peaked at just under 12%, and the new foreclosure rate peaked at slightly over 2%. The student loan delinquency rate is already at 14.3% and climbing. The student loan crisis is, by the numbers, already worse than the subprime mortgage crisis in terms of the percentage of the borrower population that is failing. And yet there is no equivalent of the Home Affordable Modification Program, no equivalent of TARP, no equivalent of the emergency interventions that policymakers designed in 2008 when they recognized that the mortgage crisis was a market failure and not an individual consumer failure. For student loans, the political framing has been the opposite. The default is being treated as an individual responsibility rather than a systemic failure of the servicing infrastructure, the repayment system, and the policy apparatus that was supposed to prevent exactly this outcome. And the CFPB, the agency that is supposed to protect consumers from exactly this type of servicer abuse, had its budget cut by Congress despite receiving a record number of complaints about student loan servicers. The watchdog that was supposed to catch the crisis has been defunded at the exact moment the crisis arrived. Auto loan delinquencies are climbing back toward 2008 levels, and 2.2 million cars have already been repossessed. The Consumer Federation of America published a report titled ___, quote, __4__, that documented auto loan delinquencies and repossessions climbing toward levels not seen since the pre-Great Recession years. Severe auto loan delinquencies, meaning loans that are 90 or more days late, are headed back toward pre-financial crisis peaks. Auto loan balances have surpassed $1.67 trillion, according to the New York Fed. Repossessions surged past 2.2 million in 2025, according to the Recovery Database Network, with forecasts of a record 3 million by year-end. Repossessions have climbed more than 40% since 2022, and the stress is no longer confined to subprime borrowers. Borrowers in the 620 to 679 credit score range, once considered above average, are now defaulting at nearly double their pre-pandemic level. The Consumer Federation of America described this mid-tier borrower slide as a warning that even greater trouble is ahead for subprime accounts, signaling heavier losses, tighter margins, and tougher questions from investors and regulators. The average price of a new car reached nearly $50,000. The average monthly payment on a new car loan rose to $749 per month. Auto loan monthly payments increased nearly 30% from 2020 to 2023 due to elevated prices and elevated rates. Subprime auto loan interest rates run between 18 and 20%, which means a borrower with a below-average credit score who finances a $25 000 used car at 19% interest for 72 months will pay approximately $15,000 in interest alone over the life of the loan. That is 60% of the car's purchase price paid purely in interest. And the tariffs on steel, aluminum, and imported vehicles that were imposed in 2025 added thousands of dollars to the sticker price, which increased loan amounts, which increased monthly payments, which increased the probability of default. The cycle is mechanical and predictable. Higher prices produce higher loan balances. Higher loan balances produce higher monthly payments. Higher monthly payments produce higher delinquency rates. Higher delinquency rates produce higher repossession volumes. Higher repossession volumes flood the used car market with inventory, which depresses used car values, which puts more borrowers underwater on their loans, which increases the incentive to stop paying. The auto loan market is running the same feedback loop that the mortgage market ran in 2007 and 2008. The collateral is cars instead of houses. The scale is smaller, but the mechanism is identical. And for the American household that loses its car to repossession, the consequences are often more immediately devastating than a foreclosure because the car is what gets them to work. Lose the car, lose the job, lose the job, lose the apartment. Lose the apartment, lose everything. The car is the first domino for the working-class American household, and 2.2 million of those dominoes have already fallen. And what most Americans do not realize is that the auto loan market is structurally different from the mortgage market in one critical way that makes the crisis more immediately dangerous for individual households. When you default on a mortgage, the foreclosure process typically takes months or even years depending on the state. You remain in the house during that time. You have time to find alternatives, to negotiate, to relocate. When you default on an auto loan, the repossession can happen overnight. The repo agent arrives at 3 a.m., hooks the car, and drives away. There is no hearing. There is no negotiation period. There is no alternative transportation waiting for you in the morning. You wake up and the car is gone. And in a country where 85% of Americans commute to work by car and the average commute is 28 minutes each way, losing the car does not just eliminate transportation. It eliminates the ability to earn income, to access health care, to buy groceries, to pick up children from school, and to maintain the basic logistical infrastructure of daily life. And the people being repossessed are disproportionately the people who can least afford alternative transportation. They live in exurban and rural areas where public transit does not exist. They work hourly jobs that cannot be done remotely. They have children who need to be driven to school because the school bus route was cut in the last round of municipal budget reductions. The 2.2 million repossessions that have already occurred in 2025 are not just financial events. They are life-altering disruptions that cascade through employment, housing, childcare, and health care for every household they touch. Credit card delinquencies hit 7.1%, and Americans are financing their groceries on installment plans. The New York Fed's household debt report revealed that credit card balances reached an all-time high, with the share of balances in serious delinquency climbing to 7.1%. That is a level of credit card distress that was last seen in the years following the 2008 financial crisis. And Newsweek reported that Ohio State economics professor Lucia Dunn called the overall debt figures, quote, 5, quote, and said that, quote, 6, quote. The average American consumer now carries $104,755 in total debt, according to mid-2025 data. Credit card charge-offs, the percentage of loans that banks write off as uncollectible, reached 4.17% in Q3 2025, near multi-year highs. And the delinquency picture is not uniform across income levels. In the lowest income zip codes, credit card delinquency rates exceed 20%. $1 in $5 owed on credit cards in the poorest communities in America is seriously past due, and the behavioral data confirms what the delinquency data suggests. A growing number of Americans are using buy now, pay later plans to purchase groceries, not furniture, not electronics. Groceries. The basic necessities of survival are being financed on installment plans by consumers who cannot cover the full cost of their weekly food at the register. BNPL arrears reached 2.45% in Q2 2025, meaning that even the alternative financing mechanisms that consumers are using as a lifeline are themselves generating delinquencies. The consumer is not just borrowing to maintain a lifestyle, the consumer is borrowing to eat, and the borrowing is accelerating because the underlying income has not kept pace with the underlying costs. Median household income adjusted for inflation was no higher in 2024 than in 2019, according to Brookings. 5 years of nominal wage growth entirely consumed by price increases, which means every dollar of new consumer debt taken on since 2019 represents not a choice to spend beyond one's means, but a structural gap between what life costs and what work pays. The debt is not discretionary. It is the mathematical consequence of an economy where the cost of existence has been repriced upward by 26 to 80% across every essential category, while incomes have remained flat in real terms. And within the next 90 days, the March energy shock will cascade through food prices, the Iran war inflation will compound with potential tariff reimposition, and the debt ceiling standoff will inject uncertainty into interest rate markets. Every one of those pressures will push the cost of living higher while doing nothing to increase the income that is supposed to cover it. The gap widens. The borrowing accelerates, the delinquencies compound, and the 7.1% serious delinquency rate that the New York Fed just documented becomes the floor, not the ceiling, for what the next 2 quarters will produce. And the distributional impact of the credit card crisis is what makes it most dangerous for the American social fabric. The 7.1% average disguises the reality that in affluent zip codes, credit card delinquency rates remain below 2%. In the lowest income zip codes, they exceed 20%. That is a tenfold gap in financial distress between the richest and poorest American communities. And the gap is widening with every quarter because the pressures driving the delinquencies, energy costs, food costs, insurance costs, health care costs are concentrated in the categories that consume the largest share of low-income household budgets. A 20% credit card delinquency rate in a community means 1 in 5 households in that community has stopped being able to pay the minimum on their credit cards. Those households are not choosing to default. They have exhausted every alternative. They have already reduced food consumption. They have already skipped medical appointments. They have already sold what they could sell and borrowed what they could borrow. The credit card minimum was the last bill in the hierarchy, and it was the first bill they stopped paying when the hierarchy collapsed under the weight of cumulative cost increases that their income could not absorb. And the unsecured credit applications surged 14.2% in Q2 2025, which means Americans who are already underwater on their existing debt are applying for more debt to cover the gap. That is the textbook behavior pattern that precedes a consumer credit crisis. Borrow to pay existing obligations. Fall behind on the new borrowing. Borrow again. Fall behind again. Until the credit is denied and the household hits the wall with no remaining access to any form of liquidity. And the average new car payment is $749 per month. The average rent is $1,700. The average health insurance premium for a family is approaching $2,000 per month. The average grocery bill for a family of 4 is approximately $1,100 per month. The total baseline cost of a middle-class American household is approximately $6,000 to $7,000 per month before a single dollar is saved for retirement, before a single dollar goes to student loan payments, before a single dollar covers an unexpected expense. The median household income of $80,000 translates to approximately $5,500 per month after taxes. The expenses exceed the income by $500 to $1,500 per month. And that gap every single month is being filled by credit cards, by BNPL, by savings drawdowns, by 401k hardship withdrawals, and by going without things that are not optional but that have been reclassified as optional by households that have no other choice. The regional banks, sitting on top of all this debt, are the ones most Americans keep their money in. The commercial real estate maturity wall, the auto loan delinquency surge, the credit card delinquency spike, and the student loan default cascade are not isolated crises. They are all connected through the banking system, and they are connected most intensely through the regional and community banks that hold the most exposure to each of these asset classes. Community and regional banks are almost 5 times more exposed to the commercial real estate sector than the largest money center banks, according to BRG analysis. Over 900 banks carry CRE exposure above 300% of their capital. These are the banks that made the office loans in 2016 and 2021 that are now hitting the maturity wall. These are the banks that hold the auto loan paper from the subprime and near-prime borrowers who are defaulting at crisis-era rates. These are the banks where the consumers whose credit card delinquency rate is 7.1% keep their checking and savings accounts. And the FDIC insurance limit has been frozen at $250,000 per depositor per institution since 2010. In real inflation-adjusted terms, that protection has shrunk by approximately 31%. A dollar of FDIC protection in 2010 is worth about 69 cents of protection today. And if a regional bank with concentrated CRE exposure, elevated consumer loan delinquencies, and thinning capital reserves reaches the point of failure, the FDIC guarantee is the last line of defense for the depositors at that bank. Silicon Valley Bank demonstrated in March 2023 how quickly a bank run can materialize when depositors lose confidence. The run on SVB took approximately 48 hours from the first public disclosure of unrealized losses to FDIC receivership. And the extraordinary measures that the Treasury and Fed used to guarantee deposits above the FDIC limit at SVB were discretionary, not legally required, and they were justified at the time as a one-off intervention to prevent systemic contagion. In a fiscal environment where the government is simultaneously managing a debt ceiling crisis, an Iran war, a government shutdown, and credit downgrades from all 3 rating agencies, the political will and fiscal capacity to extend another extraordinary guarantee is not assured. The regional banks are carrying the concentrated risk. the FDIC insurance is capped and eroded, and the federal backstop that protected SVB depositors is a discretionary tool that may not be deployed the next time. The 90-day window ahead will stress test every layer of this system simultaneously. The question is not whether the system will be tested. The question is whether any layer holds. And behind every data point I have cited in this video, behind the $18.6 trillion in household debt, the $1.8 trillion in commercial real estate maturities, the 12.34% office loan delinquency record, the 13 million student loan borrowers heading toward default, the 2.2 million repossessions, the 7.1% credit card delinquency rate, the $5 trillion in total commercial real estate debt, the 900-plus banks with CRE exposure above 300% of capital, the $250,000 FDIC limit that has not been raised in 16 years, behind every one of those numbers is a person, a family, a household that did what it was supposed to do, went to school, got the degree, took the loan, bought the car, got the apartment, went to work, paid the bills, and discovered sometime in the past 2 years that the bills grew faster than the paycheck, that the interest compounded faster than the savings, that the system they were told would reward their compliance instead consumed their margin and left them one missed payment away from a cascade they cannot stop. The next 90 days will determine how many of those households cross the line from stressed to broken. The energy shock from the Iran war is still propagating through the supply chain. The tariff reimposition could arrive in July. The debt ceiling breach could arrive in August. The commercial real estate maturity wall is peaking this year. The student loan default cliff is accelerating. The auto loan repossession rate is climbing toward a record. The credit card delinquency rate is at a 15-year high. And the regional banks that are supposed to intermediate all of this risk are carrying more concentrated exposure than at any point since the financial crisis. Every one of these pressures is measurable, documented, and published by the institutions whose job it is to measure them. The New York Fed, TREP Morningstar, S&P Global, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Federation of America, the IMF, Protect Borrowers, the Wall Street Journal. None of this is speculation. All of it is data, and the data says the next 90 days are the most dangerous 90 days for the American financial system since March 2020. The difference is that in March 2020, the government responded with $6 trillion in stimulus, emergency lending facilities, payment pauses, eviction moratoriums, and direct cash transfers. In July 2026, the government is running a $36 trillion debt with a debt ceiling about to be breached, a Fed chair transition that threatens monetary independence, a war it cannot afford, and a budget reconciliation bill that just cut $1 trillion from Medicaid and $295 billion from SNAP. The safety net that caught the fall in 2020 has been defunded, dismantled, and politicized, and the fall that is coming in the next 90 days will arrive without it. The question is not whether the system will crack. The question is where the crack appears first. In the commercial real estate market, where $1.8 trillion in loans are hitting a refinancing wall that the banking system cannot absorb. In the student loan market, where 13 million borrowers are heading toward default without a functioning administrative system to catch them. In the auto loan market, where 2.2 million repossessions have already happened and the pace is accelerating toward a record. In the credit card market, where 7.1% of balances are seriously delinquent and $1 in $5 owed in the poorest communities is past due. Or in the regional banking system, where 900-plus banks are carrying commercial real estate exposure above 300% of capital, while their depositors carry credit card balances at all-time highs and their borrowers are defaulting at crisis-era rates. The crack could appear in any of these places. And the 90-day window ahead is the stress test that determines whether the crack stays contained or becomes the fracture that runs through all of them simultaneously.